2 o'clock on the third, except for the month. Welcome and thank you all for joining our Fire Safe Sonoma Speaker Series program. This is our monthly program streaming on our YouTube channel at 2 o'clock on the third Thursday, except for the month of December. My name is Roberta McIntyre, and I'm the President and CEO of Fire Safe Sonoma, and I'm the host of the program. Helping out today is Marika Ramson. She is our county coordinator assigned to outreach and Firewise. And also today are our two fellows, Harry Hubble and Becca Fisher. And they're at their last day of their fellowship. So Fire Safe Sonoma were a little saddened that at least one of them are leaving the organization. Harry's going off to greener pastures, actually doing some work with COPE. And Becca is going to stay on with Fire Safe Sonoma part-time for a while. And so thank you, the Climate Corps Fellowship Program. And thank you, Harry, for all your help. And I'm going to hold off on my thank you to Becca because she's still with us. But actually, thank you, Becca, for all your help thus far. And thank you for sticking around to help us with all the stuff we've got going on. I do appreciate it. And then if those in the audience aren't familiar with Fire Safe Sonoma, we are Sonoma County's countywide Fire Safe Council. And we've been doing work in the wildland fire safety and risk reduction space for 26 years now. Last year, we celebrated our 25th anniversary. So if you want to know more about us, check out our website. And I'm sure one of our folks will drop that information in the chat for y'all. Last month on the program, we had Julie Atwood of the Halter Project to discuss animal evacuation and emergency preparedness. And this month is part one of a two-part presentation on grazing for wildland fire safety and risk reduction. Today, we are graced with the presence of Stephanie Larson and Sam Morrow from the UC Cooperative Extension, and they're going to discuss the hard science behind grazing. And then next month, we'll have Bronte Edwards of Rainbow Family Ranching on the program to discuss grazing from the perspective of people working in that industry. So diving into today's program, Stephanie Larson is Director of University of California Cooperative Extension, Sonoma County. In this position, she directs all research and extension programs provided by UCCE in Sonoma County. In addition, she is Livestock and Range Management Advisor, conducting education and research to integrate livestock production with rangeland management in Sonoma and Marin Counties, helping local producers to improve production and marketing. Her program seeks to enhance the ecosystem services provided by working landscapes and highlights the benefits of using grazing animals as tools to manage them. Stephanie's research focuses on the effects of climate change, and the results have assisted land managers to make sound ecological decisions to manage working landscapes to the benefit of all users. Sam Morrow, her partner in crime today, is a passionate student with a keen interest in rangelands, wildlife, and livestock production. He is in his senior year of undergraduate school at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, majoring in grassland systems, concentrating in ecology and management, and minoring in fisheries and wildlife. I bet you and Harry would get along great. He graduated from Santa Rosa Junior College with an Associate of Science degree for transfer in animal science and a certificate in livestock and equine management in the spring of 2023. While at the Santa Rosa Junior College, he was a resident student herdsman at the college's Schoen Farm, where he assisted in livestock and pasture management tasks and held the positions of secretary and president for the Agriculture Ambassadors Club. Presently, he's the president of the Range Management Club at the University of Nebraska and a rangeland and grazing project intern with UCCE Sonoma. And one of my inspirations for bringing these two presentations to our speaker series was a few months ago through another project Fire Safe Sonoma is involved with. We had Stephanie Imbonte do these presentations for a group of folks out in the Larkville, Wickiup area. And I really enjoyed the presentation, and I thought, oh my gosh, we have to get this information out to a broader audience. This is really cool stuff. And Stephanie, I really enjoyed how you created this platform where you're able to connect property owners with grazing services like a dating service. And I'm hoping you'll have time to talk a little bit about that today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our guests, Stephanie Larson and Sam Morrow. Take it away, you guys.
Great. Thank you very much, Roberta. It's great to see you. Can everyone see my slides?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. And Sam, who's my intern, is sitting right next to me, is going to cover another tool that we developed as well with UC Cooperative Extension. But I'm here to talk to you about the science of grazing, and especially as it relates to rangeland management. So as you heard, I am with the University of California Cooperative Extension. I'm a livestock and range management advisor. I have worked for Sonoma County for 40 years. So this has been my passion and my profession for many years. I have a BS and an MS in animal science and a PhD in rangeland management and ecology. And I'm really excited to have Sam with me today because his summer internship has been working with collaboratives to work with neighbors and agencies and groups like Fire Safe Sonoma to try to bring people together to address the issues of fire severity and ecologic enhancements, in particular using grazing as the tool. So why graze? Why is that important? Well, as you know, grazing can be one of the more cost-effective tools that we can use on our landscape that are too steep, too rocky for conventional livestock or for conventional vegetation management treatments such as mowing or chemical uses. And it may be in urban areas where fire just wouldn't be an option. When we talk about grazing, we have a variety of different types of grazing. Sometimes we'll go into that, but you've probably seen a lot of contract grazing going on where people are paid to graze. And then it's also really critical to think about what kind of animal am I going to choose to do the grazing? What are my goals? Because when we think about grazing, they all graze differently and have different grazing preferences. So as Roberta mentioned, we have this platform in Sonoma County, and it's throughout the state of California. And in Sonoma County, you can find it by Googling Match.Graze. And Match.Graze is just that. It is a dating service so that you can go online, and if you're a livestock producer, you can highlight your cows, your sheep, your goats, where you're available to go and graze, what your interests are. And if you're a landowner, then you can put that on there as well as, like, I have 50 acres, it's delicious grass, your cows would love it. And then you make matches. And so it's up to the grazer and the landowner to work together to come and see if grazing is an option on your property. Now, this is a free online platform, and like I said, connects the livestock grazers with the landowners, and it is throughout California. So say if you have neighbors in another county, or if you have land in another county, this goes statewide. And so it's a way to really look at how we can collectively look at habitat enhancement and fuel reduction goals. So if you haven't checked out Match.Graze, I encourage you to do that. And when I talk about there's different scales, so not one size fits all. So you might have a community where you have 10 neighbors with 5 to 10 acres each. You might come together as a community and work with a single grazer that comes and grazes all of your properties, reduces your need for mowing, chemicals, and keeps your properties safer and maybe reaching other goals. Or you might look toward contract or targeted grazing, where you're paying a grazer to come onto your property for specific goals. And that service usually is just a one-time thing. And there are programs that help offset those costs. So if you're interested in that, you can definitely contact me and we can try to make that happen for you as far as getting a contract grazer. And then there's the commercial grazers, more of the long-term grazing. So if you're looking at, I've got greater than 10 acres, I might think about having that be rented and somebody pays you to graze. So say you might say, well, I don't have any fencing, I don't have any infrastructure. Well, having a long-term lease with that grazer and partnering with other funding agencies might allow you to have some offsets to those costs so that you have more of a long-term grazing opportunity as opposed to a one-time graze. So there's a lot of different scales and a lot of different things about when it comes to grazing of what was going to fit best for my property. Now, another thing that, along with Match.Graze, is what we're trying to do is build up this community prescribed grazing program. And this is a program that has been funded by the County of Sonoma for us to go out and look at is like what makes sense of where we can graze, in particular, what's already being grazed nearby. So kind of reducing those costs. So what we're looking at is expanding grazing to neighborhood properties. We're working with interested landowners who want different methods to manage their vegetation, and it could be for a variety of different goals. We're also obviously looking to reduce our fire risk and severity, and then really create resilient communities. So it's just not 1 acre in the middle of 100 that's being grazed. It's the entire 100 acres that's being managed and actively managed for a lot of different goals. Let me give you an example. And so this is one what we call the Crane Creek Grazing Collaborative. And this individual grazes both cattle and sheep. It is private and public lands. They are currently grazing 585 acres. It is right outside of a city of Rohnert Park. And if you think about from a GHG reduction, so it's going to, it is sequestering up to 18 megatons of carbon equivalent each year it's grazed. And if we want to put that in perspective, that's equivalent to 4.3 gas-powered vehicles driven for a year. So it can add up, but it's also protecting the town of Rohnert Park. And so that land that's adjacent to Rohnert Park is grazed. And so if a fire comes through there, the fire would be less severe and the firefighters would have a much greater chance to do that, to put that fire out. We're looking at, in some of these other areas that you can see, we were looking to expand the grazing. So some of these areas that are highlighted, what if we were able to expand those grazing, working with these different landowners that aren't in this collaborative yet? We could almost double the size of that grazing unit. And again, we're increasing our equivalent of 8.1 gas-powered vehicles driven for a year. So we can make an impact from a climate perspective if we work together on creating these grazing collaboratives. So let me dive down a little bit deeper into this whole idea of climate, because some people are a little concerned about grazing and grazing animals. But when you think about grazing and livestock, they are part of the process of the biogenic carbon cycle, where CO2 is in the air. Plants, through photosynthesis, take that CO2 out of the air. They do a process called photosynthesis. That carbon is then sequestered and put through their plant, through the roots, stored in the carbon. Now, when the animal comes and grazes that stimulates the plant to go deeper, put their roots down deeper, put the carbon down deeper. So in a turn of grazing, if done well, it can increase the water holding capacity. It can improve the soil microbe health. It can increase biodiversity. It will sequester carbon, and it can help us look at reducing the GHG emission. And of course, grazing can reduce the fire severity of wildfires that we are most concerned about in our county. So just to put it in perspective, if we're grazing 1,000 pounds of annual grass, that feeds a cow for a month. That cow then can provide some kind of nutrition back to us, if that's the goal of the grazer. That equivalent is 375 pounds of CO2 equivalent that's been stored in the carbon. There's also 15 pounds of methane that we acknowledge, and that there's also nitric acid oxide that's produced in that grazing unit. But let's look at, from a fire perspective, if we burned 1,000 pounds of that air-dried grass, it's going to put out 29 pounds of CO2 or equivalent. So almost 6 times what the more carbon into the air than into the ground. And it also does put in methane and also nitric oxide. So we can document and show that by doing grazing well, we are sequestering more carbon into the soil and keeping it out of the atmosphere, as opposed to if we're burning it up in a wildfire. So maybe some of you are interested in conservation perspective. So when we look at grazing, it can be a way that addresses things like the range of species that can benefit from grazing. So whether it's mammals, insects, reptiles, fish, creations, all of those things will benefit from grazing if we do it well and do it through a grazing management plan. We can also promote biodiversity and the nutrient cycling, and that keeps that all within the system. And then water is a big thing. If we are things like vernal pools, where we have endangered species that we want to protect, we need to graze them, because that's how the vernal pools keep active in their system, and the water increases, and the pool duration will last longer if we don't have excessive vegetation around those pools. And that in turn will help our endangered species, such as our California tiger salamander. And we've lost about 90% of our vernal pools through development and different things like that. And work that we've done here locally is looking at the use of cattle grazing to graze the uplands of the vernal pools. Those are mostly invasive non-native grasses. And if we keep those down, that helps the pools stay inundated longer, and thus feeds those tiger salamanders and then those special status species that we would find in the vernal pools. So when we think about grazing and the long-term management, we have the opportunity to graze for a short term, where you might pay a contract grazer to come in one time, but we want to look at more of that long-term and thinking about how do we manage our working landscapes for the long-term benefit. And so what we find is that improving our grazing does all of those things, but we have to be active about it. And we have to get right on the grazing before and or after a fire. And I want to share this diagram with you that shows this is the Tubbs fire. And in 2001, you can see in this diagram that we have a mixture of forest and shrublands and grasses based on the different colors. And you see them stay pretty consistent in 2016. Well, then our fire came in 2017. And what you see now in this map here is that everything turns to grass, and that's in this graph here. The first vegetation that comes back is the finer fuels or grasses, but it doesn't take long. It took us about 4 years, and this map of 2021 is showing that what's coming back now is brush. And brush is the latter fuel that we're very concerned about. We have the grasses, the brush, and the trees. If we can control that middle ladder fuel, that helps reduce the severity and helps reduce that fire getting into the tree canopy. So the idea that once a fire comes, we regroup, and then we got to get in there and manage our vegetation. Otherwise, nature's going to take over, and we're going to have a burn pile that's really big once again. So that's what's really critical here. So we want to talk about managed grazing. And so you that are listening to this, hopefully you're landowners, and you might have some goals, some management goals. And obviously it might be fuel reduction, weed management, invasive species. Maybe you're into ecological restoration, aesthetic values. Maybe you don't want to use herbicides. Maybe you can't want to burn, you're in a weed, in a subdivision, it's not going to work. So you need, as a landowner, need to kind of come up with what your goals are and how we best achieve those with grazing. And then thinking about when working with the contract grazer or the commercial grazer, this could be an income. It's an enterprise diversification. They're concerned about their animal well-being. They're concerned about the reproduction of efficiency of their animals. There's labor and effectiveness and efficiency of the labor. And there could be other issues as well, as we'll talk about in a bit. So everybody should have a good conversation about what their goals is and what they want the land to look like. So communicating your goals, your long and short-term goals, and that's what we're here with UC Cooperative Extension. We can help you to achieve those goals and to talk about it and put those down in paper, and understanding if this is a multi-year or a single entry project, and then how do we manage those expectations and what is it going to look like when you're done. So the principles of managed grazing is like adjusting the rest periods, so how often you come back and graze, to the growth and regrowth of the plant. So the idea that if it's actively growing in the springtime, you might return more frequently. And I always liken it to mowing a lawn. You don't mow your lawn every day. And you mow it maybe every 2 weeks or every month or every 6 months, depending on the moisture and the temperature. And so we look at grazing that same way. How frequently do we graze that? Sometimes we're looking at a short period to graze, so we put more animals on so that they don't have the opportunity to be very selective and they eat everything there. So that's when we might want the highest stock density or the highest number of animals for the shortest period of time, and we're moving them frequently. Similar to what you would think about with migration with wild animals. They keep moving with high numbers. And so, and the large herd possibly is consistent with sound animal husbandry, and so that they're working together, you can keep an eye on them. They work well together. And then we adjust that stocking rate to the seasonality and the annual changes of what's going on in our season, whether it's raining a lot or not raining at all. We learn to adjust the carrying capacity of that land, and that's part of the science of grazing. And then thinking about with grazing and the grazing behavior, there's 3 things that we can look at. Obviously, fuel reduction or vegetation management, both the same. Then on the left-hand side, you see kind of what we would call trampling, but in a way, trampling with hoof action in a way that breaks up some of that old vegetation, that lignified vegetation. And that breaking up helps break it down and provide nutrients for the microbes in the soil. So it's a good thing to trample or break up that dry old vegetation. And then of course, manure and feces, urine that comes in is a nice nutrients for your soil and your microbes. And so again, the 3 things that they can have, and each impact can be used in targeted grazing situations. So some of you might be concerned about grazing. Well, so what are some of those issues? And we heard the term like overgrazing or overuse. And what can happen there is that maybe we've left the animals on there too long, or we had too many animals. And that's why we're really interested in looking at, tying the carrying capacity or how many animals that property can hold for how many animals we put on that property. And then we adjust the timing and seasonality of that. And so overgrazing is not a function of time. It's a function of time, sorry. It's a function of how long they were there as opposed to too many animals. But then there might be a time when we might want them to eat everything. So maybe you've got a really invasive species or a lot of brush that you want to remove, and then you're going to restore that property. And so maybe the goal is to eat everything. But again, that's going to be on a site-by-site basis. It's going to be depending on what your goals are. So that's real critical. So animals have a preference, just like you and I have a preference. If we go to a smorgasbord, we might eat different things and pile our plates with large numbers of one type of thing. Animals are no different. And so they have grazing behavior, they have individual preferences, and then there's the animal impact of that. So there's a lot on this slide, but kind of basic line is that as we like to laugh, it's like I can tell you what their preferences are, but they might show something different in the field because they didn't read the book, kind of a thing. But in general, cattle like grasses. So tall grasses, if you've got a lot of harding grass or oats or, just some Medusa head, something that might be invasive that you want to get rid of, cattle is really the good animal to do that because of the way they graze, their mouth structure. They're allowed to eat more of those taller grasses. Sheep are kind of middle of the road. They'll like a grass, they like the lower growing grass, but they love the forbs. And so if you're trying to protect an endangered forb in a vernal pool, you're not going to put sheep out there because they'll eat that endangered plant, where cattle, not interested. Goats, as you know, goats like the woodier species, so less on the grass, more on the brush. And so we try to balance that of like, what is the goals, what makes sense, which animal. And if I want to protect a certain species, I want to make sure I get the animal that isn't going to eat that certain species. And then the class of animals. So depending on their reproduction, depending on if it's public or private land, we may or may not want cows with calves, or we might just want dry females, meaning no babies with them. Feeders or stalkers, meaning their job is just to eat grass and that's their job. Pairs would be a herding, a breeding operation where you might have cow calves, lambs used with lambs, or goats with their kids. And then a wether mob, just for terms, it's a castrated herd of sheep or goats that are just, their whole goal is to graze their goal in life is to graze that property. And then seasonality is important. And so we've really been looking at this whole idea of palatability and preferences. And we want to make sure that our animals are getting the best nutrition, but we also want to time the grazing so that they will graze the species that you want them to graze. So it's trying to balance when's the optimum time to get those animals in there to graze from a nutritional standpoint, but also from a preference standpoint. And they do get bored. So we like to move them frequently, and we are addressing issues such as goats like to climb in trees, they like to chew on trees, and so you may want to protect your trees if you think about putting goats into your property for grazing. And it's just really, it's just a matter of best management of brush from a species, and when's the best time to supplement livestock if you're at a time that maybe the nutritional value is not as good. So that's another critical time to think about. So what are the trade-offs? So if you're going to implement grazing, we have to think about, what is the grazing business? Is it vegetation management? So is it that wether mobs that they're just going to eat and that's their job? Or is it a livestock production? And these are conversations that you can have with the grazers, like, what are your goals? These are my goals. And understand that some producers are going to have both of these as their business, vegetation management and livestock production. And practical considerations are, we have to think about, the nutrition for the animals, the nutritional value of the plants that they're grazing, whether they need to reproduce or not, what are the logistics of grazing, and then animal welfare is a key issue that we are always addressing. So from a nutritional standpoint, again, it ties into the palatability, the nutritional demands of the animal. So say if you have some really poor quality forage that hasn't been grazed for years, you wouldn't want to put in there an animal that has high nutritional needs, meaning she's going to have a calf or she has a calf on her side. You may think of other types of animals to use in that situation. Maybe we think about it, are they on a maintenance diet? Are we trying to grow them? Reproduction. We always are concerned about toxicity. Are we introducing the animals into a property that might have some toxic plants? And so what plants are those? Because if the animals haven't been exposed to the plant before, they may not know they're not supposed to eat them. I always put the helpful public. If you're grazing near a subdivision, or if it's a public park kind of a thing, people want to feed the animals because it's fun. But if we say we gave them some oleanders, we would kill the animals. And so again, it's being concerned, and that's why we always have signage and stuff at grazing spots. And then environmental toxins too might be an issue. So this whole idea of the logistics of moving animals around, the community grazing, is we're trying to keep animals in one place and move them on hoof from pasture to pasture to pasture. It's called opening the gate principle. I mean, there's not always a gate to open, but it's this idea of every time we have to move, we have to put them in say a truck and a trailer. And so we're trying to reduce that GHG emission. And so can we move animals from property to property without doing a lot of hauling? So if you're going to have grazing, you're going to need to have some kind of a loading facility. A lot of times grazers have a portable one. You might have to be able to have a herder on site, or have a grazer that's really local and very close to you that can be on call for 24/7, so that we don't have any issues. We might have sheep that need shearing. If you're in a public situation, we might need to have a hospital pen, or we might just have an agreement with the grazer. If an animal gets sick, it needs to go off the property. Water's critical. So if you're thinking about grazing, here's an opportunity to work with the neighbors to say, okay, part of the deal is that you add water, and provide water for the animals. And then the whole urban interface is like, how do we work with the public to educate? Animal welfare is very important to these grazers because they are wanting to care for their animals. And so the nutrition, we need to look at shade and shelter, managing, animal health in public situations is very critical. Predators are a big issue. We don't want any, try to keep them animals safe. So there might be guarding dogs with the animals that could cause them barking at night. So things to think about. or we have a herder with them to protect them. You know, if there's a natural disaster, we always want to be prepared for a fire or flood. How do we get the animals in and out? Wool or hair sheep. Some of you might not know that some of the sheep that we have are we call hair sheep, and they naturally shed. So you might see some sheep out there that look like they have mange. They're just doing what they normally do, and they shed their wool. And then this whole issue of, is it goats, is it sheep, or is it cattle, or is it all three? Because they can all three graze together as well. So just some of the challenges for you to think about. There's the labor issues, there's the hauling and the equipment issues, and then there's grazing year round. So you might have an animal, a grazer come and graze your property one time a year. But for the other how many ever days after that one time, those animals need to go someplace else and graze. And so that's why we're trying to expand grazing as an opportunity to move our animals around, keep our livestock producers in business, keep our communities safe. And then the whole issue of nutrition and toxic plants, predators, logistics, things like that, and animal welfare. We are all very key points that we talk about and work with our grazers at all times. So just kind of some takeaways on this is the understanding of grazing behavior and forage preferences is critical to matching the livestock to the landowner's goals. The trade-offs and remembering that, focusing on vegetation management, whether the production goals. Targeted grazing requires a different set of producer skills. So either you could work very closely with the grazer, or you have a lease agreement with the grazer who does everything, and you are just getting the benefit of that lease payment. And to remember that this is a business and they need to make money to do this, and they want to do a good job for you. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing that and turn this over to Sam to talk to you about another program that we have. And we're going to answer your questions.
That's
See that?
While you guys queue that up, oh, wait, you got it?
No, go ahead. Go
Okay.
ahead, Roberta.
While you guys queue it up, I will share with everyone a story or a experience I had with the vernal pool. Your vernal pool and tiger salamander thing reminded me of this story, and I think folks can appreciate it. I learned a big lesson. So when I was a fire inspector for City of Santa Rosa, I was put in charge of their weed abatement program. And part of that involved sending a contractor out to abate properties that required abatement that they didn't abate themselves after a certain period of time and a certain number of notices. And I sent the abatement contractor to a property to abate it, and he did. And then I learned shortly thereafter that he abated a vernal pool. So I got in a lot of trouble for that and learned a big valuable lesson. So I will leave it at that. And it looks like you've got your slideshow up, so that's perfect. But yeah, don't abate vernal pools. That's the lesson of the day.
all right. Yeah. So the wildfire fuel mapper is the other tool that Stephanie was hinting at, and so just a quick overview of what I'm going to be talking about in regards to the wildfire fuel mapper. I'll talk about fire risk in Sonoma County, how the wildfire fuel mapper can help us in understanding modeling and managing the fuels on our properties. I'll talk about the tool and show some of the maps that you can get in your custom report. And then the wildfire fuel mapper is not just a platform that offers custom map reports, but it also offers opportunities to connect with specialists for support and determining what the best practices are for implementing on your property based on your fire threat and your topography and vegetation, and places where you can find funding resources to kind of help offset those management practice costs. So as we all know, fires in Sonoma County and across the West Coast have become larger and more destructive in recent years. This is due to a wide range of things, including fuel buildup, climate change and drying landscapes and warming temperatures, fire suppression to help kind of protect our growing populations and increasing city development. And so we need to kind of determine or figure out a way to reduce this fire hazard. And so there's three kind of principal ideas for reducing fire hazard, and that's fuel management, community education and accountability, and policy and research. And so with fuel management, we're looking at things like understanding the fire hazard on your land, identifying what kind of fuel management practices to employ, and working with local specialists to implement those practices in the best way possible. And then kind of working with those specialists to educate the community about home hardening and retrofitting to make your house or buildings more fire safe, implementing defensible space, and creating educational resources and documents that we can hand out to community members that kind of educate them on these topics. And then for policy and research, we're looking at things like funding programs, revised or edited new regulations and standards that kind of take into account fuel management practices and these community accountability and education aspects, and then looking to regional fire research to learn how the fires in our region are behaving so that we can best manage those types of wildfires. And so the wildfire fuel mapper was developed to kind of provide a coordinated regional approach to managing fuels and protect local communities and infrastructure from wildfire. And kind of what I see as the principal tool of the wildfire fuel mapper is the ability to understand your fire hazard, identify your corresponding fuel management strategies, and how to work, and using that information to work with local specialists to implement those practices and to manage your fuels and reduce your fire hazard. And so we're currently rolling out phase 2 of the wildfire fuel mapper, and that comes with some pretty big updates or upgrades, including the addition of three counties to the platform. So now property owners in Napa, Contra Costa, and Alameda counties are able to access information on their parcels with the wildfire fuel mapper. In phase 1, parcels had to be greater than 3 acres, but that's no more with phase 2. All parcels are available to be selected for the custom map report feature. So now even small landowners or managers, small acreage landowners and land managers are able to access this valuable tool. Another cool feature that's been added to the wildfire fuel mapper is the ability to select multiple parcels for a single report. Prior, each parcel needed its own report. And so you'd have your stack of, if you had multiple parcels, you'd have a big stack of reports, but now you can have just one report with all that information for all those parcels. And also you can select which maps now you want to include in your parcel report. So you're getting an extremely customizable and succinct report that contains just the information you want. So as I mentioned, the biggest feature or most impactful tool that the wildfire fuel mapper provides is the ability to visualize and assess your fire fuels. And so what I mean by that is you're able to see a wide range of landscape, topographic, fuel map types of information in your custom map report. And so in your custom map report, you'll receive a parcel report, which kind of just highlights the APNs you select. So your parcel number, it'll have, if you select multiple, it'll have all those parcel numbers. the address of your property and the total acres, and then it gives you kind of an overview of your fire hazard and fire history, and also kind of the responsibility, who's responsible for managing fire in your area. And then as you get into the maps, you can get very detailed maps, such as this one, which documents the vegetation present. So the ones that are highlighted in the white border are the parcels that I selected for. So this is a multi-parcel report that highlights the information for all these parcels, and it breaks it down based on the category of vegetation, and then it refines it with the color to either to the species of vegetation, which is helpful to those that are trying to manage the land for fire fuel mitigation, so they know which practices they can implement. And so, and corresponding with this map, you also get a vegetation map information sheet, which highlights the common name of the major vegetation types for the parcel or parcels you select, as well as it gives you the acreage of those vegetation classifications. Another map that you can select for is the fuel model map. And this just kind of highlights kind of what fuels are present on your property or properties, and so that you can understand how the fire will move and the fire behavior and how it will move through your property, and how fast and size of flame, which is another map. And so you can really target those areas that are going to produce the high flames that are hard to fight by hand. And so you can target those areas for your fuel management practices. But like I said, the wildfire fuel mapper, it provides more than just those custom maps and custom map reports. It allows you to understand your fire risk so you can prioritize the areas that you need to manage. And it allows you to form actionable steps with the help of specialists to kind of take the next step in reducing those fuels. So after you generate your report, you can use that report to connect with local experts that'll help you kind of come up with a game plan for how to manage your fuels on your property. And using those maps, they can go over where your high fire threat areas are, so you can target those areas first. The platform also, as I mentioned, lets you kind of see what funding opportunities that are available to help offset these management costs, and it helps in the creation and implementation of a treatment fuel plan. And this graphic here just kind of summarizes the tool of the wildfire fuel mapper and all the different areas it can be used to help you manage your fuels, kind of you understand your maps, what your maps mean, and the steps you can take to move forward with your fuel management plan. So that's what I have on the wildfire fuel mapper.
Okay, fantastic. And we do have some questions in the queue. Go ahead, I'll let you wrap up, Stephanie, and then.
Oh, no, we're
Okay.
open. Just shout out to my summer intern who's gonna leave me next week, so.
Awesome.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And Harry, if you want to switch off the spotlight, that would be very helpful. And Harry's been dropping some questions in the chat, so we've got a handful to cruise through. And it looks like we have plenty of time to get through them all.
Yes, we wanted to
We
have
started a
extra
little
time for
bit
grazing.
late, so we may
Answer
go,
questions.
it's okay with everyone. We might go a tiny bit past the hour, but yeah, and we'll still get our hour in. So this question came from Bruce. How does grazing sequester CO2? It sounds like that may have been answered, but if you could share the response with us.
Sure, of course. You have to think about the biogenic carbon cycle, and so there's CO2 in the air, and the plants grab that through photosynthesis. By what plants do is then that carbon is then moved through the plant and stored in the soil, and that's part of the carbon cycle. And then they kick out oxygen. Now, if you add grazing to that, that stimulates the plant to do that more. If you don't graze or don't mow, the plant kind of gets lazy and just doesn't really do a lot of photosynthesizing. And so it's this whole idea of if grazing removes the plant material, then the plant goes then and puts out more leaves, and the cycle continues. And so it's by actively managing those plants is that they are actively sequestering carbon.
Okay, Claire's bathroom window, right? Okay, and Eva writes, does Sonoma, I imagine she means Sonoma County. Does Sonoma work with any contract grazers on public land? And if so, how are projects like that funded?
Great question. Very excited. We are partnered with Sonoma and the Goldridge RCDs, the Resource Conservation District. They have gotten funding either through the County of Sonoma's Vegetation Management Program, which is run by Ag and Open Space, and have applied for grants to pay for contract grazers. That has been a one-time payment, which is a really great start. There's also some more grants through the Coastal Commission that the RCDs are working on, that Sam and I have been working with the public agencies. So the city of Petaluma, the city of Cloverdale, the city of Santa Rosa, or we're able to apply to the RCDs to get funding to implement grazing on public lands. So there are funding sources. In addition, you can work through the Natural Resource Conservation Service, or NRCS, and they can work, if you have grazing on your properties, you can go into a contract with them that the grazer can then pay for things like water development, interior fencing, and even prescribed grazing.
Okay, yeah, one of the things that, I could tell from the presentation is really important is the larger the area, the better. So I imagine if a group of contiguous landowners work together and establish, say, like a forest stewardship plan or something like that, you can work together and imagining that grazing is one of the applicable treatments. You could all collaborate on getting the grazers out there to do all of those properties.
Absolutely. And the larger the size of acreage is the reduction of cost, because and again, is if you can move from the open the gate policy from property to property to property, it's less labor for the grazer to undertake. And so increasing your sizes helps. Let me just also add that we're very actively working with Permit Sonoma to look at the Williamson Act. So if
Right.
you are a property owner that has 40 acres or more and you are able to graze part of that, you could apply to be in the Williamson Act because you've added grazing onto your property. That helps reduce your property taxes.
It does. The downside to that is you don't have as many taxes going to fire services.
I agreed. I mean, it's a trade-off. I agreed, but
Yeah.
hopefully it reduces our fire risk. So
Yeah, in the more rural areas,
yes.
Debatable whether that's a huge impact or a minor impact. But when I was a fire marshal, I ran into that a couple of times. So you pushed a little button there.
No, and I totally get it. It's less money to the
Yeah.
county too. I get that. It's just
Yeah.
we're trying to think of what are the
But
incentives
it is
to
definitely
implement
an
some kind of
incentive.
vegetation
Yeah,
management.
the other incentive is that if you have contiguous property owners, you're probably going to be in a better position to get grant funding to do work on.
Absolutely. You know,
the
and using the wildfire fuel mapper, you can target those
Yeah.
critical areas. And we are also working with fire professionals to say, you tell us, fire professionals, you know how fire moves and its fire behavior, where should we target? And so when we get those directions, we then go seek out those landowners and say, would you be interested in doing some vegetation management? In particular, we're looking at grazing, but
Yeah.
all the tools, implementing any of and all of the tools.
Yeah, speaking of the fuel mapper, I was pretty blown away by how much it's improved since the last
Yep.
iteration of it.
Yeah, we're
Pretty
very
cool.
excited.
Yeah, with that said, Priscilla writes, how current is the fuel mapper data for the reports that are output?
I believe it's the same data. I don't think we've gotten the updated LiDAR put in there yet.
Okay, and do you know if it's using the current CAL FIRE FRAP map, or is it using the older one for fire hazard severity zones and risks?
So it uses, there's the CAL FIRE hazard map, and then
Yeah.
there's also, I think it was I want to say 2018, is a part of the Wildfire Fuel Mapper project. They created a Sonoma County fire hazard map, which is
Right.
more specific than the CAL FIRE map.
Okay, thanks.
Because it's able to break the pixelation of the data is a smaller.
Oh, in the map layer?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Celeste writes, if we are currently removing much fire fuels on our property, how current are the maps regarding vegetation fuels? I think that's a similar question. Erica writes, is this information confidential or is it available to insurance companies? Well, the field mapper, it's available for public use. So I imagine if an insurance company wanted to use that to collect their data, they could. But in my experience with insurance companies, I don't have firsthand experience, but from the folks that we've spoken to through Fire Safe Sonoma, it feels like every insurance company has their own secret sauce way of assessing their risks or how they want to assess their risk. So, they may or may not use the data, and if they did, they probably wouldn't tell you.
Right. When we first released the fire fuel mapper a few years back, we got the same kind of question and concern. And what we were told is that the insurance companies already have this kind of information, and they're using other things too to make their assess their rates.
Yeah. Insurance, that's another topic we've covered a little bit in prior speaker series presentations, but it's such a huge moving target. So stay tuned. Surely at some point we'll do an update on insurance when we have more information. United Policyholders also is a good entity that is an outfit that provides information regarding insurance. It's really helpful to the public. They're a nonprofit. Charles writes, what are the different ecological effects on wildlife, soil and water courses of the different animals, sheep, goats, and cows?
Well, a lot of times it really depends on the number and the timing, not necessarily the species. In saying that, however, they do have preferences. So, if you are concerned about trees and stuff, goats tend to work pretty hard on trees. Cattle are bigger, but sometimes we do the same equivalent from a carrying capacity. We just look at pounds of animal, not a cow, a sheep, a goat kind of a thing. And so it can be equivalent. Really, it's just all of them can have some ecological issues. It's just, that's why we always talk about managed grazing and tying the carrying capacity or how many animals the land can hold to the number that we put on there. So it's really about timing. But given the fact that, yes, they do have different preferences. They have different behaviors. Sheep are much more docile. Cows are bigger. And goats are just goats. They're very mischievous animals. And so they kind of do what they want to do.
Yes, I imagine after a bit of rain, if you put large animals like cows on property, it could tear up the soil pretty good.
That is a good point. Depending on the soil
Yeah.
type, that's a real key piece. And so what we're always concerned about is if you have a lot of clay content in your soil, you know, you want to make sure you don't have that cattle input, those hoof marks kind of a thing. Now, if you're looking at vernal pools, they kind of actually like those hoof prints because they'll actually hold the water in
Oh.
certain areas. So again, it's a trade-off, but again, it's really about timing and about the numbers.
Yeah, so it's more complicated than just going and borrowing a goat and stick it on your lot to see what happens. I mean, that may
That's
or may
right.
not be healthy for the goat, may or may not be healthy for your soil conditions or your
Correct.
plants, etc.
Correct. You know, and that's one thing about water is that we always want to make sure that they have good access to water and typically off-site water so that they're not relying on a creek or a stream for their water source.
Yeah, I'm embarrassed to say, and I truly am embarrassed to say this, but I will say it because that's how I roll. But I was that person that, you know, thought, yeah, just put a fence up and put an animal in there and let them eat. You know, how hard can it be? And then when I saw your presentation, you know, I'm like, holy cow, this is way more complex than I thought. This is cool. So I was happy to learn this material and yeah, so yeah, note to self, it's never as simple as it seems. Um,
No,
yeah,
and one size doesn't fit all. And so that's why we want to be more adaptive. And that's why we might say, okay, put this number of this type of animal in, and then we might have to 3-4 months later change everything because it didn't rain or it rained too much, it's too wet, there's not enough feed. It's just really about adaptive management.
yeah. Um, so I'm sure Bronte will cover this next time, perhaps in our part 2 of this, but can you maybe share with us a success story that really worked well, where you're able to connect a property owner to the animal and get some really cool stuff done?
Well, actually, Bronte is really great, but I'll take some of her thunder. Is that her property that she's grazing in Bennett Valley, which is one of the collaborators we're hiring or highlighting, sorry. She met her match on Match.Graze. And when you hear the landowner talk about how he swiped right and got the perfect match. And so what has happened is that she has come onto that property and then contacted 3 other neighboring properties. And so they are either to be in compliance with a Williamson Act, which they were and aren't anymore, or just from a fire fuel management. She has expanded her grazing operation based on Match.Graze. And so, but we see several of these opportunities happening, whether it's on Match.Graze or just us reaching out to the different property owners. And that's something that Sam's been working on this summer.
Yeah, I wonder if, like, let's say you have a property owner who, like, 10, 15, 20 years ago, got their property into the Williamson Act. And maybe in recent years, they've been having trouble complying with all the criteria. Could they use this as a pathway perhaps to become in compliance again?
Absolutely. We don't monitor Williamson Act compliance, but we are absolutely happy to help people to implement grazing as a way to be in compliance.
Okay. Yeah, awesome. Well, we are right at the top of the hour, so that works, I guess. Let me make sure, see if there's any more questions in the queue, and I don't see any new ones. Anybody have any last questions? Go ahead and raise your hand and we'll field them in the last few minutes. And see none. Well, thank you guys for your presentation. And I can't wait to dive into the field mapper again and try it out. It's been a while. So I honestly wasn't a terrible fan of the earlier version of it, but this version that you guys just showed us is pretty exciting. I want to
Yeah,
play.
I'm very excited. And I always tease Napa County about quit sending fires our way. And so now they have the fuel mapper. And so hopefully we can all work together as a bigger community to become more resilient. But thank you, Roberta, and your team.
Yeah.
They've been great.
Oh, we do have a question. It looks like Delana Bradford has a question, real quick. Delana, go ahead and unmute and toss your question if you don't mind.
She's just clapping, Roberta.
Oh, is that? Sorry, my
Yep.
glasses aren't working. I need a new prescription. All right. Well, thank you, Stephanie and Sam, so much for the presentation. We're looking forward to seeing Bronte. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that.
Bronte Edwards, yes.
Bronte Edwards next month.
Thank
And
you very much.
Yeah, and thank you, Fire Safe Sonoma team. Thank you, Marika and Harry and Becca. And Harry, again, it's your last day. We're gonna miss you, dude. And thank you guys all for joining us today. I do appreciate it. So join us next week or next month, excuse me, for part 2 of this, when we go into the actual physical grazing part of this. So we will see you then. Thank you guys.